Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. My friends, we have got to talk about the Warzone meta because obviously, as we know, we're in a relatively diverse meta right now, but it seems like we're straying more and more away from an open meta and going back towards that meta where we really only have a few realistic options if you want to actually compete from lobby to lobby. Over the past few seasons, we've seen a pretty solid meta in general for Warzone, but it's sort of dwindling right now. There are some changes that I feel like could be put in place to really help out the meta. I want to break down what I think the problem with the general Warzone meta is right now, because I feel like it's a very obvious thing that's sort of going on. So as we break it all down, if you enjoy the video at any point, let me know by dropping a like on it. Would be seriously appreciated. And of course, if you're new to the channel or if you have not already subscribed, feel free to do so. That way you can always stay up to date with everything going on in COD. So we are back here. We are on Warzone Ranked, and we have this whole meta coefficient graph. And basically what this shows is just how diverse the meta really is. The lower this graph is, the more weapons are being used. The higher this graph is, the less weapons are being used. So obviously when Warzone started, no one really knew what to use. We were experimenting with everything, and it's the lowest that the meta coefficient has ever been. Then people started to figure out, hey, the M4 is really good. Hey, the Grau is really good. Hey, the Bruin's really good. We had this pretty high coefficient, 0.78, when pretty much everyone was just using the Bruin and the Grau. Then those got nerfed, and we got into like the Kilo meta here around like September and October of last year. And it was the actual best the Warzone meta has ever been, the most diverse and open that the Warzone meta has ever been. And then Cold War dropped, and around the holidays, we got the DMR meta, which is the worst the Warzone meta has ever been statistically. That got nerfed. People started using the FFAR on the AUG. That was also pretty bad. Those got nerfed. And then, as of lately, for the past few months, we've been in a relatively decent meta. Like I said, it was pretty open. And then we had some more weapon tuning, and then things like the Krig and the C58 really started to stand out. The AMAX got nerfed, and Cold War weapons were pushed very heavily, and it started to rise once again. Now, lately, we've sort of been on like a plateau, I would say. Technically, this is leaning down, but I don't think it's going to dip too much more, just because right now where the Warzone meta stands, I don't really think there's all that much realistic diversity. And that's where we can turn to this chart here, which shows us just how popular certain weapons are. Now, the Krig is still number one, and it's not really trending upwards or downwards. It is about double the pick percentage of the next best weapon, which is the Car, which is obviously a very different playstyle. 16% of players are still using the Krig, which is weird because the Krig just got nerfed 2 weeks ago decently. It was a solid nerf. Like, it made the Krig a lot less versatile and a lot less consistent than it was before. Is it still super easy to use because they didn't touch the recoil? Absolutely. It's still a beam, and its neck multiplier, its neck shots are still very powerful. Its TTK is still relatively decent, but there are a lot of better options. So why aren't players choosing other weapons? Well, the Krig is still too consistent even after getting nerfed. So are other Cold War weapons that we've seen nerfed in the past. C58 has now been nerfed multiple times. Still one of the best rifles in the game. We've seen Cold War SMGs nerfed as well. They're still predominantly being chosen over Modern Warfare weapons, and I think the main issue with that is the fact that when we see nerfs and buffs take place, the buffs that happen to Cold War weapons are not always super significant, but they're game-changing enough to make that specific weapon be chosen over something else. Like, for instance, when the Krig was altered, it became more popular, a few months back, and that's why players have started to use that now. Before that, it was awful. It was a pea shooter. No one was using it, right? You look at the weapons that have been buffed for Modern Warfare. Are they contenders? The AUG got buffed a few months back. Did it make it better? No, not at all. You look at nerfs. When things are nerfed in Cold War or on Cold War weapons, how drastic are said nerfs? The Krig, clearly not all that drastic. The C58, clearly not all that drastic. When things are nerfed on the Modern Warfare weapons, how drastic are they? Look back at what happened to the Kilo back at the end of like season 6. The Kilo basically was what the Krig is now, right? Kilo and Krig are very similar to one another. When you look at them from meta standpoints, the Kilo got that extra damage drop off, and it became way less used. The Krig got nerfed, and it hardly changed at all. So the nerfs that happen on Cold War weapons are not nearly as drastic as they are on Modern Warfare weapons, it seems, and the buffs to Modern Warfare weapons simply aren't enough. That's really what the main problem here is. And I think that this is an important conversation because a while back in one of Raven's update patch notes, they specifically said they wanted to take a look at some of the lesser used Modern Warfare weapons, and they wanted to buff them and make them more competitive. And did they do that? To a few weapons, yeah, like I said, the AUG got buffed and it was made slightly better. Was anything else drastically changed? Not really. The M13 got a slight buff. Was it made drastically better? Not at all. So this whole equalization of Modern Warfare and Cold War weapons is just non-existent right now. And we can even go through category by category and see what's being used and why. Krig, like I said, obvious choice for rifles. The only reason the Grau is even in contention here, and same deal with the M4A1 and the Kilo, is because they're easy to use. These are being used on fully loaded loadouts or ghost loadouts, so players can maximize their AR ammo off of a regain or off of their second loadout, right? But in no way is the Grau competitive with the Krig, with the Pharaoh, with the C58, even with things like the EM2, the QBZ. All those are more realistic choices, statistically speaking. Yeah, the Grau is easy to use, but it's going to get outshot a million times by these Cold War rifles because it just can't compete when it comes to the damage. Its TTK is not good enough. When we look at SMGs, what's winning in this category? The Bullfrog, the MAC-10, the Modern Warfare MP5 is the real only choice you have as a Modern Warfare weapon. The CX-9 is decent, but I'd still take the MW MP5 over that every day of the week. That's the only option. MAC-10, OTS, Cold War MP5, PPSH, all better options. The Bullfrog is solid. Like, Cold War weapons just severely outweigh Modern Warfare weapons in every category that they share. Snipers now, as we saw, the CAR is the second most used weapon in the game, but the Swiss is better. There's no reason to use the CAR if you're good with the Swiss. People use the CAR and it's still a very popular weapon because they're familiar with it and they're comfortable with it. That also applies to the Grau and the M4. But you look at what the other top weapons are, it's all Cold War, and anytime there's a Modern Warfare weapon in this like top list just for players choosing them, let alone the stats, which really don't even compete anymore, the real only reason that Modern Warfare weapons are on here is for comfortability and players are familiar with them. Statistically, these Modern Warfare weapons just can't keep up. The M13's TTK can't keep up with the best rifles. The Kilo's TTK can't keep up with the best rifles. It's just a simple matter of fact. Cold War is being pushed too heavily, and that's strictly a business move, right? They want players to buy Cold War and level up the weapons there and do all that jazz. I assume the same thing's going to happen with Vanguard here when that releases. The Cold War weapons now will become the Vanguard weapons. Those will be pushed more than Cold War and Modern Warfare. But the fact that Raven has gone out of their way in the past to say, hey, we want a diverse meta. We want things to be used as much as possible. We don't want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weapons being used strictly over everything else. They've even said they want to buff Modern Warfare weapons that are underutilized. And we're still sitting here in this meta where there's really only 2 options for Modern Warfare weapons, the CAR and the Modern Warfare MP5. It's just not something that's come to fruition yet. This is a diverse meta for Cold War weapons, but Modern Warfare weapons are obsolete 99.9% of the time. So the real problem with this meta is the fact that Cold War adjustments aren't severe. They're not really drastic. The Modern Warfare weapons that have been buffed in the past still aren't good enough to compete. And the Modern Warfare weapons that are in the meta right now hardly compete with the nerfed Cold War weapons after they've been adjusted. So it's just a strict imbalance of game versus game here. And I want to make this video to sort of shed some light on it. If anyone from Raven or Call of Duty sees this and is like, hey, yeah, you know, that's a good point. Zach's speaking some facts here. We could adjust some things here and there. I just want to see this coefficient continue to dwindle, but realistically, I don't see that happening right now because you don't have a reason to not use the Krig, to not use the Bullfrog or the Swiss or the Stoner. There's just too many dominant Cold War weapons versus Modern Warfare weapons, and that will forever hinder this meta from being truly open if it's not adjusted. So, quick little video talking about the current state of the Warzone meta, in my opinion, on it right now, and what I think could be done to sort of adjust that. But that is going to wrap things up for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, let me know by dropping a like on it. It would be seriously appreciated. And of course, if you're new here or if you have not already subscribed, feel free to do so. That way you can always stay up to date with absolutely everything going on in COD. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy. Have an awesome rest of your day. And I will catch you guys later. Peace out.